Welcome back to Inside the Vault, another episode here on the Keep Counting Podcast Network. I am your host, Ryan Smith, and my guest today is an SI writer for your Carolina Panthers, also for the Charlotte Hornets as well. He is just a Charlotte sports guy, lives in Charlotte currently, and go check out his work at SI. And I apologize if I mispronounce his last name because I didn't check with him to start. Matt Alquiza?
Close, Alquiza.
Alquiza.
You
Okay.
get a solid B plus. Not the worst I've ever heard by far.
Perfect. Okay. This podcast is starting off on the right foot then, Matt. So, well, good to have you, man. Welcome to Inside the Vault. Excited to just chop it up with you about the Carolina Panthers, all things off season. Let's start with the re-signings for the team, and we'll get into free agency and the draft a bit later. Andy Dalton was re-signed, one of the notable ones, but obviously a starting quarterback last year for the Panthers. Did you think someone like Andy Dalton would be back, considering everything that happened last year? And are you surprised that he came back?
Yeah, not surprised. I think it is very clear, even when Dalton was the starter and Bryce was the backup, that those two have a great working relationship. I mean, you just see it every time the camera flashed at the sidelines, or if you were in the stadium and watching, they were attached at the hip at all times. So, in order for Bryce to continue developing, I think it's smart for the Panthers to keep as many things as similar as possible. So, keeping the quarterback room the same from 24 to 25, I think is going to be key in continue Bryce's continued development. So yeah, not shocked at all. I think it was absolutely the right decision to retain Andy Dalton for 25.
And then just going around some of the notable free agents, Cade Mays signed his tender back on March 7th. LeBron Ray, who, it's 50-50 for me, whatever. He signed his on March 7th. But quarterback Mike Jackson agreed here just a few days ago. We saw Dave Canales said he wanted to bring him back. I was excited they were able to get that done. And then obviously the O-line with Corbett, with Christensen, finishing with Cade Mays, as I said. I'll be honest, Matt, I was stunned. Stunned is the right word, I think, that Brady Christensen did not get at least some type of starting money on open the market, and he was able to come back on a one-year deal. Corbett Mays, I'm not that surprised, obviously, with them. It was kind of talked about that way, but Christensen's I'm pretty surprised about. Was that on anyone else's bingo card?
Yeah, I mean, shocked is the right word for me as well. As shocked as you can be at a depth offensive line signing, right?
Yep,
Yeah,
exactly.
with all the money that you see getting thrown around to, was it Dan Jones, I think is his name, the guy from Pittsburgh who signed in Tennessee.
Yep.
There are just so many guys across the league who are getting tens of millions of guaranteed dollars. And I mean, we've seen Christensen play what, four or five different positions on the offensive line at a
Yep.
competent level at this
Everything but
point.
right tackle.
Right, everything but right tackle because Taylor Moton is
The
the
stalwart.
stalwart over there. Yeah,
Yeah.
there you go. Yeah, so I am thrilled that he is back in Carolina, but absolutely shocked that he did not go somewhere else. He feels like the kind of guy that a team like Philly would sign on the cheap
Mm,
as like a super
exactly.
versatile piece. He can play multiple roles. They obviously have a lot of guys to pay, so they're going to be losing talent in the offseason. I mean, we've already seen that on their defense, obviously, but yeah, it feels like the kind of guy that a smart team signs for a cheap contract and deploys him as needed because he does have the talent to play four or five different positions on the offensive line, no matter what a former coach says about the length of his arms.
Yeah. And then kind of going back down the rest of the folks, I'm not going to spend my time obviously on people who are unsigned, but for the ones that are currently were our free agents, Tommy Tremble, I was very excited to have him back on the tight end position. I think he's a very underrated player. A lot of people don't give him a lot of credit. And then Mike Jackson, who I mentioned at corner, very key to get him back opposite J.C. Horn, who just signed that $100 million extension, $70 million guaranteed. Talked about Trimble and Mike Jackson and the impact on those guys. They may not seem the flashiest names, but they played well down the stretch, and especially Trimble. Everyone remembers, at least I do, with the whole last second in Atlanta with Bryce's Steph Curry there moment.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Tremble as well. I think he gives you 80% of the blocking, 75% of the blocking that Ian Thomas would give you, but infinitely more receiving talent, right? he is kind of like a versatile tight end piece. And you hear Dave Canales talk about tight ends, it's like he's talking about his kids. He loves his tight ends. He loves deploying tight ends in his scheme. He leans on his tight ends for a lot of things. Back last August when Tremble and Thomas got hurt, Canales talked about how hard it was going to be for Jatavian Sanders to kind of operate as the lone wolf in the tight end room. So I think it's good for them to bring Tremble back. I do think they're still going to target another tight end in the draft and another
I do
tight end
too.
in free agency somehow because I mean, like I said, Canales really, really values the tight ends, and I think if he can get as many versatile guys in the room as possible, that's kind of the end goal for that tight end room. You have Sanders as kind of just like a singular pass catching threat. He's not giving you much as a blocker in the run game. You have Tremble who can do a little bit of both. I think they could add another weapon at tight end, a guy that can challenge Tremble for that kind of H tight end receiver spot, right? And then Jackson, similar. I wasn't a huge fan of his game last year. He was pretty inconsistent. He got bullied a little bit by some bigger receivers, but that was more so. I think when J.C. Horn missed a week, Mike Jack had to like take a step up and guard the other team's number ones. So yeah, but he's fine. I mean, he's a consistent option. He's a very, very, very solid number two cornerback. And that's another position I think Carolina is still going to have to address at some point, whether that's early in the draft if they target it, and we'll get there eventually, target a Will Johnson or a Jahdae Barron in round one. But I think there is another move in the secondary coming at the corner position as well. But yeah, I think it's a solid deal for Mike Jackson for sure.
Absolutely. Rounding out our free agent tour here before we move on to other places. We saw Xavier Woods did leave for the Tennessee Titans. I personally was a fan of bringing him back if the price was right, it is my caveat. But
Not
not
that
so,
price.
not,
Not the
yeah,
price that he was paid.
no, yeah. Not so sad to see him go though at the end of the day. Jordan Fuller, Nick Scott, we knew the safety room. We'll get to Trayvon in a second. But going to the special teams, Sam Martin, Buffalo Bills, signs a 1 year deal for the Carolina Panthers. Johnny Hecker also left to the Tennessee Titans as well. JJ Jensen, we know, is still here. And then Eddie Pinheiro remains unsigned. There was talks that he might be coming back if the market's not well, but I don't think that's going to happen personally. Matthew Wright's already here. And I think they're going to draft a kicker personally in the draft. Um, but is Sam, not to spend too much time on a punter, I'll just briefly ask this: is Sam Martin an upgrade, or is it more just because he's 35 years old, just like Johnny Hecker, and his stats were slightly better than Hecker's last year? Let's be honest.
Yeah, I do not know their stats off the top of my head. I have not dove very deep into Sam Martin film. I mean, I think it's a lateral move at worst, right? I
Yeah,
mean, you're not going to get a strong punter take out of me. The only thing I will say for sure is I don't think Sam Martin is going to be as good of a passer as Johnny Hecker is.
that's
Johnny
true.
Hecker
We
is
can,
a
yes,
is a legitimate weapon in
correct.
the fake punt game, and I don't know if Sam Martin has that in his bag, unfortunately.
Yeah. Oh well. Oh well. That's not too much of a loss there. And then the latest one was Dan Cheesness signed a 1 year deal earlier tonight, so he is coming back as well. His claim to fame for a few catches last year for the Panthers. Is there any other guys before I move on? Last question here: is there any other guys off this list that I didn't name? Could you see us coming back? David Moore, is Shaq Thompson's market not as good as he thought in that whole theatric release, and he might make his way back eventually? Felipe Franks, Mike Boone, Nick Scott, Sam Franklin, anybody else that I mentioned that may come their way back eventually, or is this going to be it? You think?
Yeah, I think if anybody, it's a guy like Mike Boone. It's like a guy like David Moore, just a solid veteran who knows the system to kind of round out the roster come training camp time. With Rico Dowdle signing earlier tonight, which that's a move that I'm a huge fan of
Yeah,
to back up Chuba. That kind of makes running back not as dire of a need for the rest
correct.
of the offseason. But yeah, if Mike Boone wants to come back on a cheap contract, friend of the, I don't know, friend of my friend Mike K, could be a friend of the program. Don't know if he's been on
He
here or
is a friend of
not.
the program. Yes.
Uh, Friend of the program, Mike K loves Mike Boone. I don't know if it's the first name sake that he shared there, but yeah, a guy like him, a guy like David Moore, if they're not able to bring in a big time weapon to just add another receiver to the roster again that knows the system, that knows Canales and Idzik from their time in Seattle. But yeah, no one that I'm like, yeah, they pounding the table to bring back. Definitely not any sort of game-changing options that are still on the table as pending free agents from the Panthers from last year.
Well, let's get into those free agent signings that you kind of alluded to with Rico Dowdle. We'll get to him in a second. Um, I'll just kind of give you the name and the quick contract figure, and you tell me kind of your reaction. Turk Wharton, I'm going to call him Turk, from Kansas City, the defensive tackle, 3 year, $54 million a year, former Kansas City Chief, who's been to three straight Super Bowls. A lot of people thought we might have overpaid for him a little bit, but I really liked him specifically against rushing the passer with Derek Brown.
Yep, yeah, same. I think where the Panthers are, and we saw it last year with Robert Hunt and Damian Lewis, you have to overpay for talent at this point because you are not a proven winning franchise. If you want to get young ascending players in the building, you're paying a tax for that because of how poor you've been as a franchise on the field for the last, I mean, decade or so at this point. So yeah, big fan. Anybody that can get to the passer is welcome in Carolina in my book. So I like the potential. He's still young. He's what, 26 years old. Fits nicely next to Derek Brown and fits nicely in a rotation with a guy I'm sure we're about to talk about here in just a minute.
Yes. Going down the lineup here, Pat Jones, the second linebacker slash defensive end. They just like Vikings defensive ends. I mean, DJ Wanham, Stephen Weatherly a few years back didn't work out so well, but
Jared Allen,
Jared Allen,
the
yeah, that
Super
was
Bowl
more
year.
years back.
Yeah.
Yeah, Panthers love Vikings defensive ends. Not the sexiest signing in the world, but someone who got 7.5 sacks last year in Minnesota and gives a chance to start.
Yep. Yeah. Another bargain signing. Again, young guy, pretty decent potential at this point. You're paying a bit of a tax because you're Carolina, because you are the worst defense in the history of football. So 2 years, 20 million is probably a little bit rich compared to the market value on him. But again, take a swing on a young guy who is coming off the best season of his career and see if you can double down on that here.
And then let's be honest, we have a law firm opening up in Charlotte. It's called Brown and Brown
Yeah.
Incorporated. That would be Bobby Brown the third and Derek Brown on the D line next to each other. I absolutely love this signing. I love Bobby Brown. He was a great piece for the LA Rams. Now everyone's like, Ryan, slow down. If he was that great, why didn't the Rams re-sign him? Well, he had a good year and he got priced out of LA. I mean, it happens, and I think he's going to make a great piece for this franchise. They got him to stop the run, and that's exactly what he's good at. Him and Derek Brown. I really, as you can, if you can't tell, really like the signing of Bobby Brown.
Yes, and that is who I was referring to a second ago. He's your run stopping defensive tackle. Wharton is your pass rushing defensive end, defensive tackle, whatever you want to call it in Ivero's 3-4 system. I am a huge fan of them just throwing bodies or throwing money just to have bodies on the defensive line. Now you went from having arguably the worst defensive front in the league last year after Derek Brown was hurt to now having four guys in both Browns, Wharton, and Ashawn Robinson that can all just rotate from snap to snap. It's a third down, need to rush the passer. Great, you're throwing Wharton in there. It's a 3rd and 1, and you got to stop the run. Cool. Brown and Brown are going to plug the holes in the middle. Like you just have a bevy of options at defensive tackle right now. Again, it's similar to what they did last year with signing the two offensive guards to really, really turn around arguably the worst unit in the league. They did the same exact thing on the opposite side of the ball this year, and Dan Morgan is doing exactly what he said he was going to do with building this roster from the inside out, from the trenches first. And I'm a huge fan of all these moves they've made.
Yeah, and I totally botched on my saying here. Pat Jones, 2 years, 20 million. Bobby Brown, 3 years, 21 million, on those contracts. Trayvon Morningwig, 3 year, $51 million in the safety room. I personally thought it was gonna be Javon Holland if I'm not if but they ended up going with Morningwig, who I like his run stuffing ability as well. And so I mean, can't go wrong with either of those two. And so I like Morningwig's game a lot, and he should fit in well for the team.
Yep, absolutely. Again, another guy who butters his bread stuffing the run. They're committed to fixing this atrocious run defense that they've put out on the field for the last couple of seasons. So anything that they can do to make that happen, I'm a big fan of. Because I think when you fix the run defense, the pass defense in turn gets fixed as well. You
Correct.
fix one, it just elevates the entire defense as a whole. So yeah, I'm a fan of. I think you have to go into the offseason with the idea of fixing one or the other. you don't have enough resources to allocate to really fix everything all at once on defense. So I'm a fan of them giving everything they can to at least trying to make themselves a competent run defense to raise the floor of the defense as a whole, which then again in turn helps the pass defense. So yeah, fan of Morrigan, what he can bring to the run defense as well.
Well, I'll get to Rico Dowdle in just a second. Do you have anything on linebacker Chris Rosenboom from the LA Rams 1 year deal with the Panthers? Young body could be maybe a case to start after Josie Jewell next to him. He's got experience in the 3-4 defense. Anything coming from the Rams and the Chiefs?
Yeah, no, nothing specific on that one other than I think Brenda Song of Disney Channel fame had a video where she complained about him on the Rams
Oh,
defense last year.
okay.
Yeah, she knows ball. There was this like 2 minute video of her on some show talking about the Rams defense and what she would have done differently in the playoff game against the Eagles. And I'm pretty sure he was mentioned by name as somebody who struggled to bring down ball carriers in a playoff game in Philly. So. Brenda Song, not a fan of Christian Roseboom.
Um, Rico Dowdle, 1 year, 3 million, that could be worth up to $6 million. Dallas Cowboys running back from last year. Um, I like this signing, like you said, sneaky underrated with Jonathan Brooks expected to miss most of 2025, if not all of it. Good backup to Chuba Hubbard. Could be a return game as well, since they let Blackshear test free agency and have it resigned to him. So I like him potentially in a return specialist position as well.
Yeah, I mean, if you're signing a 1,000 yard rusher for, I think he's guaranteed $2 million, and his contract gets up to six based on performance. So yeah, if you're getting a 1,000 yard rusher to back up your other 1,000 yard rusher behind this offensive line that is projected to now be one of the best in the league again, I mean, I think it's a good signing. And there are plenty of people who are saying, oh, why didn't they just draft a guy? It's a deep running back draft. Take one in the later rounds. This roster still has so many needs. You have to fill some of them with cheap free agent signings. So now they have Dowdle. They bring back a Mike Boone. They sign another UDFA running back at the end of the draft, and then they can attack other needs with their third, fourth, fifth round picks, and I have to use another somewhat premium pick on a running back. So fan of Dowdle, Carolina native as well, which is always a good thing
Mhm.
coming back to Charlotte, coming back to the Charlotte area.
Yeah. Let's get in now to kind of the draft, like you just kind of preambled there a little bit. Um, so I, so let's someone who writes for the Panthers and writes for SI. Okay, let's talk this out. Do you think? So I am a big fan, a huge fan of Mason Graham. Now, I realize some people think now that we signed Wharton and Bobby Brown, we don't need a guy like Mason Graham, and we should go after, let's say, a Tyler Warren, a Ted McMillan, somebody of that nature. I'm sorry, Matt, but if he falls to 8, if Mason Graham is there for the taking at 8, I don't see how the Carolina Panthers pass him up. I'm just going to be flat out honest. If he is there at 8, you take best player available, and Graham is an absolute menace that I have said before. He will change this franchise on the defensive line next to Derek Brown if we were to get somebody like him.
Yeah, I think what you said there, three words, is kind of the key point. You just take the best player available at this point. You see the Eagles reigning Super Bowl champions. That's what they do every year. They have the best defensive line in football. They have Fletcher Cox, Brandon Graham, name whatever other defensive end, defensive tackle they have. And they still, their first round picks are Jalen Carter, Jordan Davis. They're taking pass rushers in the second round.
Yeah.
Like the Eagles have their board, they build it out, and no matter what position the guy plays, whoever is at the top of it is who they draft. And that's how you build a great team. If that's doubling down on strength, great. You spent all this money on defensive line and free agency. Go make it even better by adding the best defensive tackle in the draft class. If Mason Graham is gone, he's not the best player on the board. Great. If it's Will Johnson, cool. You need a cornerback. Add to the strength that you're building right now. If it's Ted McMillan, great. You desperately need a pass catching option for Bryce Young. Go get your guy. I think whoever is the best player available, whether that's Mason Graham or not, that's who the Panthers should take. But I'm with you. I have no qualms with them taking Mason Graham with the eighth overall pick. I think he is a great player will have a case to be named the best player in this draft class 10 years from now. And he's worth taking a pick, even though you just invested some resources in that position in the past week.
Let's drill down a little bit more before I get to the offense. Let's focus on the defense with this first pick for a second. The two other, if Mason Graham is gone in this scenario, Mikael Williams, Jalen Walker from Georgia, they had their pro day today. Obviously, those two guys have been mocked to the Panthers a lot. And you can compare them, but Will Johnson, the name you already mentioned from Michigan, cornerback, people have him falling. And you hear different people say, well, whoever gets him is going to get an absolute dog because he is falling, and I don't know why. Is it the injury and people are just scared off by how much little he played this year, and that injury just being a reoccurring thing? Is that really all it is? Did he not test well? Because it seemed to me he's a pretty clean prospect outside of the injury this past year, that obviously saw him not play very much at Michigan.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of everything you mentioned, but I think it also, for folks who are in like the draft content space, it just becomes prospect fatigue at some point too. Johnson was and I remember talking about him with folks in August and September about how he's going to be the first corner off the board and how he's going to be a surefire top 10 pick. And then he comes out and he has a fine season for a fine Michigan team, and or when he was healthy, then he gets hurt. And I think people just kind of get tired of talking about him. So yeah, a little bit of everything you said. But again, I still think he is a top 10 talent in this draft. Would have no problems with him landing in Carolina as well. Again, at a position of need, in my opinion, too.
So you would take him over Jalen Walker and Mikael Williams, is that correct? If those three players are on the board and the Panthers choose between one of those three, you would take Will Johnson.
I would order it Walker, Johnson, Williams.
Okay. All right.
I think Walker is going to be a very good player. He's drawn some Frankie Louvu comps, and there are
Right.
folks who have said like, he can't play this hybrid role. You have to play him at one or the other. And I'm like, man, if you're drafting for Frank in 2023, Frankie Louvu was the best player on the Panthers defense when Brian Burns was in and out of the lineup with like his injury was
Yeah,
in
Elbow. That sounds
2023.
right. Yeah.
Yeah, Luva was the best player on the Panthers defense. I think he led the team in sacks, goes and signs a decent deal in Washington. If you draft that with the eighth overall pick, like I'm totally on board with 4 or 5 years of that before he gets to his second contract. I feel like I've seen people say you can't draft Frankie Luvu with the eighth pick. Like, why not? He was awesome in Carolina. He was a fan favorite. He did everything, did all the little things right, stopped the
Yeah.
run, got to the quarterback. So yeah, he's my number one. He's my number one choice for Carolina at this point in the draft process is Walker over anybody. I kind of feel about him like you feel about Mason Graham, it seems.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not expecting Mason Graham to be there. If he is there, I think it's past Jacksonville. I think he's going to be there. I think
Sure.
Jacksonville is the spot that I think he's going to go if he goes before 8.
Yeah.
Um, Tyler Wharton, he's a very, I mean, everyone's like, well, he's not Brock Bowers. Don't draft him at 8. Well, no one's Brock Bowers. Brock Bowers might be the best
Yeah.
tight end prospect in the last 20 years. Like, the guy is a freak. You saw what he did with crappy quarterback play in Las Vegas. Let's be quite honest. So, yeah, no one is Brock Bowers. But Tyler Warren was a quarterback in high school. They used him in just about every position except punter this year at Penn State. So, that would be and the way Dave Canales talks about it, tight ends, like you said, I could very well see the Panthers do that at 8 if they're just not sure about one of those defensive prospects and they take their best player on that board. But if Tyler Warren's up there, I could see that being the pick.
Yep. Yeah, I'm not a big Warren fan myself for Carolina specifically, but like you said, if he's the number one player on their board, I have no problem taking him there. I don't think Jatavian Sanders showed enough last year to stop you from taking a guy like Warren at 8 overall, right? I mean, Sanders he exceeded expectations by far for his rookie year, but I think a lot of that was because he had to, with Tremble and Thomas missing so much time. And then you signed Tremble to this deal, but I mean, you could say that Tyler Warren is Tommy Tremble plus, right? Like they are similar profiles when it comes to athleticism, when it comes to their games. Warren is just probably is better than Tommy Tremble at this point. So
Yeah.
wouldn't be a huge fan of the selection, but like you said, if he's number one on their board, they can defend it. Canales loves his tight ends. I mean, there is a fit there.
Yeah. So just kind of straight up, who are your picks for the draft for the Panthers? What positions do you feel like, when all said and done, come April, what do the Panthers need to walk away with? We all know edge rusher. We mentioned corner, receiver. I personally think we need a long-term offensive lineman out after Moton is gone. Maybe a kicker in the later rounds, and linebacker is a sneaky need right now, even with this Rose Boom signing from the Rams.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of mentioned all of them. There's a name kind of slowly creeping up draft boards. Jahad Campbell from Alabama. He's an off-ball linebacker. He's
Yeah,
another guy that I would not be shocked to see Carolina take at 8 at this point. Folks have kind of talked about this draft being a little bit weak at the top, so there are
right.
going to be guys like him that rise up late in the process at a probably non-premium position. But shoot, if you can draft a linebacker that's going to be here for the next 10 to 15 years in a Kuechly, Thompson, Dan
Thomas
Morgan
Thomas Davis, yeah.
mold, Thomas Davis, yeah, that kind of mold, then sure, like go for it at 8, especially in this draft class where you're every prospect has question marks, right? Like the James Pierces, the Shamar Stewarts, the Jalen Walkers, Michael Williams. Those guys all have question marks. There's not a surefire guy at number 8. So yeah, linebacker is a big need. You got to take another guy. I think if you're not taking Campbell in the first, take on, late day 2, early day 3. I'm still on board with them taking a running back in the 6th or 7th round. If they don't bring back a Mike Boone or make another signing before then. But wide receiver is the main one. I don't see the path to Carolina getting that elite playmaker in free agency or via trade. I don't think T. Higgins will find his way to Carolina in the next couple of months unless has a layover at Charlotte Douglas. It's got to be like a Ted McMillan at 8, a Matthew Golden at 8, another guy who's kind of rising late up draft boards. Or you take a guy in the second, third round, one of the two Iowa State receivers, Higgins or Noel.
Yep.
So yeah, I think linebacker, wide receiver, edge rusher. There are still plenty of needs on this roster, although they just spent a ton of money in free agency over the last couple of days.
Absolutely. I'm a big fan of those Iowa State receivers you mentioned, among others as well. Do you think safety could be in play if they trade back? I think only if they trade back. Malachi
hmm
Starks, Xavier Watts from Notre Dame, I think would be a perfect fit in this defense, next to Trayvon Morningwig. I think that's a sneaky need, even after Trayvon Morningwig is signed, and I very well could be in play at 8 if the right player is there and they feel comfortable taking a safety that high, because it's another one of those devalued positions, like you said.
Yeah, I think a trade back, even like Nick Eamon just tore up the combine. He's another guy that
Oh,
would be
that,
in
yep, I forgot about
consideration
him. Yeah.
who's kind of moved his way into the first round. So yeah, I mean, I think a trade back, you move back what 10, 15 spots in the first round. You added another day 2 pick. I think in that scenario, sure, safety is definitely on the board in round 1, or you trade back and take a pass rusher day 1, safety and pass rusher on day 2, right? So I mean, I think no matter what, I think Carolina is going to double up on edge rushers in this draft at some point, whether that's first and second round, first and third, second and third. But yeah, trade back scenario, I think a safety is still very much on the table. Or they don't trade back. Xavier Watts is, I think, being mocked in the second or third round. Could easily see Carolina take him on day 2.
Well, as far as the trading and other free agency, I will agree with you on T. Higgins. I don't think he's going to end up at Charlotte. However, I do believe I've heard he has had some discussions with the Panthers and Bengals, respectively, about T. Higgins. They are interested in him, but I don't think a deal is imminent. But maybe the right price gets the Bengals to shove him here. I'm just saying. I don't
I just
know.
I that the price is what scares me off
Correct. I
personally.
would
Or
agree,
the
and I
team
think
has
that's why
still
he hasn't been
has
traded. Obviously,
Right. Yeah. The team has so many needs. You can't hand over premium draft capital for T. Higgins when you are still in this roster building phase that Carolina is in. You just saw how much you got set back by trading that haul for Bryce Young. It set you back 2 years, and they are finally kind of on the other side of that. So yeah, you can't do that for T. Higgins, in my opinion.
yeah. Unless, like you said, Charlotte Douglas layover, or we just fleece the Bengals front office for something. Yeah, I'm with you though. As much as it would be nice to have T. Higgins, I just don't see that as a possibility right now. Unless they shock us all, because who knows? It is the Panthers.
Sure.
Um, Going forward, as we kind of wind down here, Matt from Sports Illustrated, Matt Alquiza, my guest today here on Inside the Vault. Um, Matt, leave us Panther fans and some of the hopefuls with kind of your we'll call it your off-season plan for 2025. We have free agency is basically wrapping up now. The draft is coming. We're going to draft some players there. But what do the Panthers need to do to have a successful 2025 season? What are some positives that our the fans and listeners can take away kind of heading into 2025?
Yeah, I think you need to add another pass rusher or two in the draft. I think you need to really, really shore up that position. You need to go one of two ways. You need to either double dip on pass rushers or take a pass rusher and a corner. You need to get two of those positions, whether it's, like I said, two pass rushers or a pass rusher and a corner to help shore up the pass defense. You did everything that you can to fix the run defense in free agency. Use the draft to start fixing your pass defense as well. And then they need to add another weapon, whether that is in the first, second, third round of the draft. They have to get another outside receiver to pair with Leggett and Coker and Thielen. My idea, heard Canales and Morgan talk about Leggett at the draft last year. They talked about using him on these end arounds, on these screenplays, on kind of these more like gadgety deals, which I think he could really thrive in that role with his speed and size. Take an X receiver, so your primary three receivers become whoever they draft, Jalen Coker and Adam Thielen. And then you have Xavier Leggett as this athletic beast, as like a queen of the chessboard kind of guy on offense that you can use in a number of different ways.
Yeah.
Which you probably don't want to use your second most recent first round pick in that way. But I'm a fan of his skill set in that way. Use him in a bunch of different ways. Don't just put him on the outside and let him try to beat a defender one on one because that's not his game. So yeah, add a pass rusher, add a corner, add a weapon, and I think Carolina does have an outside chance of winning the division come 2025.
Well, dang, you stole my last question. I was going to say, what is your bold prediction for the Carolina Panthers in 2025? Mine is that they have an outside shot at the seventh seed in wild card to make the playoffs in 2025.
Yeah, I mean it's the division really. It, New Orleans is not going to be any better.
We can skip over them. I'll just be honest. We can skip over
Yeah,
them.
they're an absolute train wreck. I have not seen enough from Penix. He obviously was great in week 18 against Carolina last year, but it's the worst defense in the history of football. I need to see a little bit more from him. He had a good game on Sunday Night Football against Washington. I'll give him that. But yeah, not sold on Penix yet. And then Tampa Bay, it's what their fourth year now in ingraining a new
Yeah,
play caller, fourth
yeah.
straight year of a new play caller. I mean, at some point that's going to catch up to them. Mike Evans isn't getting any younger. Chris Godwin is coming off a major injury. There's a real chance that they slip pretty far from last year to this year. And folks wanted Todd Bowles fired before they made the playoffs. There
Oh
were
yeah.
definitely Bucks fans who did not want Todd Bowles back for 2025. So there's an argument right now that Carolina is trending in the best direction of anybody in the division, which, I mean, knock on wood, it feels like heresy to say that after where they've been for the last 5 to 10 years. But I mean, you could make a sound argument that Carolina's in the best position going forward out of anybody in the NFC South.
Matt, but where can folks find your work for Sports Illustrated and all the other good things you do? Anything else that you want to plug that the folks can find you at?
Yeah, Panthers on SI, Hornets on SI, and all of my stuff is on my Twitter account at or X at MLKiza8 is where you can find me.
Awesome. Last question for you, Matt. Is there anything that I maybe didn't talk about and bring up in free agency? It could be draft, could be roster construction, whatever you want, really. Something that I didn't bring up that maybe you want going out the door, our listeners to kind of know and be informed about with this Carolina Panthers team in 2025 and this in this offseason.
Yeah, no, nothing specific. I think what I've been thinking about as I turn my pillow to the cool side and go to bed
Good
recently
reference there.
this week is it's just the continuity, man. It's they're bringing back the same coaching staff for the second year in a row. They're bringing back all 10 offensive linemen that played last year. They're building on their strengths. They're trying to fix their weaknesses through agency. It just feels like the Panthers are operating as an adult franchise for the first time in a while, which is a good thing. And it gives me hope that there is a light at the end of this long, dark morass of a tunnel that they've been in for however long.
It's been we're about to enter the out of the decade in which we were in a Super Bowl. So that's that if that tells you how long it's
Right.
been. Um, Yeah, I mean, not really a question, more just a couple statements by me. I really thought Brent Tillis was the. I mean, where we talk about hiring Dan Morgan, we talk about hiring Dave Canales, but Brent Tillis is so dang good at his job, man. I mean, and,
Hmm.
and I know we gave him a technical promotion to come here, but the way he just manipulates the cap and he can just do wizardry things,
Yep.
I just enjoy watching Brent Tillis work this time of year, especially in just the things that just weren't really possible for the Panthers prior to his arrival when it comes to the cap. And then, like you said, Anish Shroff, voice of the Panthers, alignment was the word he used on this podcast last year. Just really between coach, quarterback, general manager, and even David Tepper, the owner, who has taken a step back this year, finally, in some people's eyes.
Yes.
And that alignment is what is key for going forward. And I think, like you said, great things to come for the Panthers here in 2025 and beyond. Um, we'll see what happens. But I would love to have you back on the pod when you're available, Matt. But thanks again for coming on Inside the Vault. All the best to you, and we'll talk to you down the road. Thanks for coming on. And that will wrap up this episode of Inside the Vault, episode 62. Rate, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcast, and we will see